A Great Argead Saga ALEXEIN, Alexander the Great. Volume 1, Telesias, The War Dance. By Makāula Nakae. A new episode every single day. Episode 47, Living Pledge. The Royal Reception Chamber, Pella, dawn. That morning, the palace audience chamber vibrated with a raw atmospheric friction, generated by the barons' collective panic. Every sequence of agonizing diplomatic bargaining with Pelopidas had finalized, and the merciless parameters dictated by the Theban titan sat fully exposed before the ledger of the court. To the visceral horror of the native nobility, every singular, humiliating demand had been accepted. The air within the great hall hung unproportionally dense, weighted by silent dynastic fractures and the suffocating metallic tang of iron grease rising from oiled breastplates. Philip, who had routinely drawn breath as a transparent shadow stationed at the absolute perimeter of the court, was abruptly summoned to the foot of the royal dais. Flanking his left wrist stood his elder brother, King Perdiccas III, his features completely blanked out into a pale, bloodless mask of failed sovereignty. On his right lingered Regent Ptolemy of Elorus, who had systematically rewired his cultivated aura of courtly flattery into a freezing, immovable calculation of survival. At the vanguard of the veteran commanders arranged in a strict defensive semicircle, General Attalus stood positioned at a highly conspicuous coordinate. He shared 0 fractions of the sycophantic dead silence maintained by the other barons before their foreign masters. His jawline remained clamped into a brutal structural rigidity, his right palm driven hard against the gold hilt of his falchion, with enough velocity to turn his knuckles bone white. His pupils remained ruthlessly locked onto Philip, not with the lightweight infantile pity of the lesser lords, but with an incandescent, lethal malice. A prince bartered away like a yearling bull to buy a piece we should have plundered with our own steel, Attalus thought, his teeth grinding behind his lips, a primitive provincial fury boiling in his chest. If it were my blood on that line, I would choke the passes with Theban corpses before I handed the cradle of Macedonia to these southern rhetoricians. To Attalus, this 14-year-old prince was nothing more than a piece of submissive currency, a living dynamic of shame. Divorced from the collective mass behind them, radiating the stark mountain-born grace unique to her Lincestian lineage, Queen Mother Eurydice sat perched upon her ebony chair. She cut the flawless dimension of an immortal Argead monument, yet Philip's clinical intelligence immediately detected the rapid, hyper-focused rhythmic clenching of her jaw muscles. It was the solitary visible index of the volatile engine of war, currently driving through the inner chambers of her mind. Philip, son of Amyntas, Ptolemy announced, the 43-year-old usurper preserving a carefully metered fluid cadence designed to project total control. A monumental decision has stabilized for the reason of state. As a foundational parameter of this covenant, your physical frame will execute an immediate departure for the south, accompanying 67 offspring, extracted from the highest ancestral lineages of our nobility. 68, Attalus violently spat the metric from the margin of his lips, his voice cutting through Ptolemy's smooth delivery like an iron axe through pine. The heavy, unpolished resonance generated by the 22-year-old warlord caused the surrounding lords to instinctively contract their perimeters, drawing away from his volatile presence. 68 sons of the elite companions, heteroi, are being systematically surrendered into the palms of those foreigners, Attalus snarled, his gaze sweeping the room with blistering contempt. Traded away like common livestock engineered for the sacrifice, while we play at being kings in a house without walls. Perdiccas finally ruptured his internal deadlock. The voice of the 17-year-old sovereign was thin, pitch-strained, and balanced on the absolute edge of a psychological fracture. Your intellect will be introduced to the supreme parameters of education within that city, Philip, the young king said, his throat tightening as he forced the words out. Those assemblies constitute the most illustrious and noble academics walking this earth. His gray pupils executed a transient microscopic intersection with his younger brother's gaze, a raw diagnostic transmission, loaded with an impotent grief, tragic apologies, and a frantic, desperate petition for a salvation he lacked the power to command. Precisely, Ptolemy continued with fluid equilibrium, completely neutralizing the king's turbulence with a smooth wave of his hand. You shall be stationed adjacent to the elite youth of their state, completing your instruction under the immediate brilliant genius of Epaminondas himself. A freezing, crystalline truth instantaneously pierced the 14-year-old prince's cerebral cortex. If the administrative, and martial law of Macedonia possessed any authentic greatness, our house would by no means be dropped onto its knees before an alien empire, groveling for its survival. Philip audited, his pulse dropping into a terrifyingly serene rhythm. He evaluated the battle-scarred mask of fury pinned across Attalus's face. If my flesh remains anchored to the mud-choked matrix of Pella, my intellect is mathematically guaranteed to learn zero fractions of the mechanics that dictate the cosmos. Thebes is not my prison, it is my laboratory. Attalus executed a deliberate forward sequence of strides, his heavy military boots generating a sharp rhythmic strike against the flagstones that echoed like a drumbeat. Scan the precise dimensions of that whelp. The young general roared, directing a rigid, accusing forearm toward Philip, as he turned his face to confront the assembly of commanders. We stand here, actively exporting the unadulterated bloodline of Amyntas to be systematically castrated as a domestic pet for the Boeotians. Whelp, do not allow their fluid southern flattery to trick your intellect into the absolute delusion that your frame constitutes a Hellenic entity. If your marrow retains a solitary echo of the martial mass wielded by your biological father, you'll toss the hours required to memorize their poetry to the dogs. You will focus the totality of your intelligence to clinically compute a solitary ledger, the exact mathematical calculation of their spears. This child shall flawlessly execute both parameters, General. Eurydice's voice cut through the grand hall like a razor-thin blade drawn aggressively across a sharpening stone, honed, freezing, and carrying an absolute sovereign authority that stopped Attalus in his tracks. She rose from her seat, executing a rapid, majestic descent from the royal dais. The sea of barons split before her path like a receding tide, instinctively dropping onto their knees. She halted exactly one heartbeat from Philip's chest, her immense shadow of grief completely shielding the boy's frame from the surveillance of the room. She extended her hand, her fingertips tracing a slow, microscopic sequence across her son's bruised cheekbone, her touch light yet grounded with an immense, unyielding mass. This boy carries the unadulterated blood of the Argead house, she declared, pivoting her pupils toward Attalus to launch an overt, crystalline challenge that forced the young general to hold his breath. He departs for Thebes by no means to execute a submissive surrender before their gates, but to be flawlessly forged into the ultimate weapon of state. Let those high-ground Greeks demonstrate the absolute structural integrity of their fortifications and the exact reach of their spears before his pupils. She compressed her stance, dropping her voice into the low friction of a conspiratorial whisper engineered exclusively for the prince's ears beneath the cover of her veil. Enter the matrix of their academy, Philip. Become their supreme, indispensable companion, she breathed, her words vibrating with a dark, intoxicating, maternal iron. But carve this calculation deep into your bone. Only the man who navigates a house under the posture of a guest, while systematically dissecting its structural parameters and mapping its entire layout, retains the capacity to one day turn inward and reduce that architecture to absolute ash. Philip executed a slow, deep inhalation, locking the cold, metallic environment of the hall into his lungs. My preparations are finalized, the 14-year-old voice announced, possessing an uncanny, sudden tranquility overlaid by an immense architectural stability that instantly overawed the collective mass of the hall. The line is ready. Attalus executed a solitary, microscopic tilt of his neck, an overt diagnostic sign of structural recognition. The boy had finally computed the authentic math of the cosmos. The universe is an unyielding, merciless slaughterhouse. Philip would by no means terminate his timeline as a common piece of hostage currency. He was poised to plunder the absolute blueprint of how they had systematically pulverized the myth of Sparta. The exact military secrets that Attalus, insulated by his primitive provincial pride, refused to scan, and which Ptolemy, paralyzed by his sycophantic terror, lacked the capacity to wield, would be thoroughly digested into the marrow of the prince. Pelopidas, operating with the clinical efficiency of a commander who computed that zero margins of time remained on his ledger, mobilized the army. The absolute weight of the Theban hegemonia had severely stretched and diluted their domestic military resources across the map. To the south, Epaminondas was consuming the totality of his intellect to anchor a new matrix of alliances, attempting to counter the desperate, volatile friction of a dying Sparta. Further to the north, a serpent named Alexander, tyrant of Phaerae, was actively recoiling his predatory battalions across the bedrock of Thessaly. To permit a solitary day of latency within the borders of Macedonia was equivalent to tossing the supreme geostrategic interests of Thebes into the gutter. The massive imperial march toward the south, engineered to rewrite the structural equations of the known world, initiated its heavy, calculated movement. To be continued. A great Argead Saga ALEXEIN. Volume 1, Telesias, the War Dance. A new episode every single day. We are dropping a new episode every day until the epic conclusion of Volume 1. Each chapter delivers a tight, hyper-focused 5 to 15-minute hit of cinematic historical drama, perfect for your daily plunge into antiquity. Watch the cinematic video trailer. Listen to the full saga now. Bookmark Volume 1, Telesias playlist. Subscribe to follow the rise of the Argead dynasty. Thumbs up to help push our vanguard through the algorithm's gauntlet. Comment below.